This video is on subsequent remedial measures, which is governed by Rule 407. Please read the assigned text if you have not done so already. Rule 407 is part of a series of rules that are designed to protect certain social policies. Okay, so let's think about Rule 407 in sort of the paradigm case. Let's say that a tenant has slipped and fallen on the common stairwell, injuring himself. He then sues his landlord for inadequately lighting the stairs. The day after the accident, the landlord had added strong fluorescent lighting to the stairwell. At his trial, the tenant would like to introduce the evidence that the landlord added this fluorescent lighting. The evidence is clearly relevant. It makes it somewhat more probable than it otherwise would have been that the lighting was inadequate if the landlord fixed the lighting, improved the lighting after the accident. Okay. Nonetheless, the evidence will be excluded under Rule 407 because it involves a subsequent remedial measure. Why? The reason is based in social policy. We're concerned that the landlord will not improve the lighting in the stairwell if he's afraid that that could be used as evidence against him in a later lawsuit. And so our rule here is designed to promote the social policy of encouraging post-accident repairs. Let's look at the text of the rule. The format of this rule is similar to a number of other rules which we will see over the next few class sessions. In this rule, we have a prohibition, a list of requirements which, if met, will cause the evidence to be excluded from the trial. And then we also have what's called an other purposes clause, which allows the evidence to be used for other purposes subject to Rule 403. So we're going to walk through this rule piece by piece so that you get a feel for how it works, and then in class we'll be looking at several hypotheticals to give you a better feel for it. Let's start with the prohibition. The first piece I'd like to look at is the requirement that the evidence involve a remedial measure. The courts have treated a wide variety of measures as qualifying as remedial measures, including repairs such as fixing the lighting or fixing a faulty board. It also covers things like design changes to products or adding warnings or warning labels. Okay, so that is a broadly defined set of things that would qualify as a remedial measure. A second requirement for the evidence to be excluded is that the measure must have been taken after the plaintiff's injury occurred. Okay. This requirement is tied directly to our rationale. We don't want someone, after an accident occurs, we don't want the defendant to decide against making a repair because he's afraid that it will be introduced in a lawsuit. However, if the repair has already been made prior to the plaintiff's injury, then we no longer have that concern. Now you're thinking, how could it be that the repair had been made prior to the injury? And the answer to that is in a products liability case. Okay, so let's say that we have a situation where a plaintiff has purchased a car, then the car is redesigned, and then the injury occurs after the design change. Okay. In that situation, you have to consider the point at which the remedial measure was taken as compared to the date of the injury. If the redesign occurs before the injury, it is not covered by the rule's prohibition. If the remedial measure, say a recall, occurs after the injury, then it is covered by the rule's prohibition. Okay, and that brings us to the third requirement for the prohibition to apply, and that is that the evidence must be offered to prove one of the listed purposes. In the federal rule, we have a very broad list of purposes. It covers just about everything: negligence, culpable conduct, defect in product or design, need for warning or instruction. Just as a side note, Ohio's rule is much more limited. It only covers evidence that is offered to prove negligence or culpable conduct. It does not reach products liability cases, but the federal rule of evidence does. And that's the one I want you to focus on for this class. Okay, so that's how the basic requirements of the prohibition work. Let's look at that other purposes clause now. The other purposes clause tells us that if the evidence is offered for another purpose, such as impeachment, ownership, control, or feasibility, if disputed, it can be used for that purpose. Under the rule, and this is special to Rule 407, if the party is offering the evidence for the other purpose of ownership, control, or feasibility, that that issue of ownership, control, or feasibility must be disputed by the opposing party. Okay, so it must be disputed if you're offering it for that. What does that mean? It means that your opponent, the opposing party, can avoid introduction of the remedial measure simply by stipulating to the other purpose. In class, we will be talking further and using hypotheticals to look more closely at what it means to impeach and what kind of analysis you need to do when it's offered for another purpose. But be sure to remember that this is subject to Rule 403. The reason is that if the evidence falls within the prohibition but is admissible for another purpose, our evidence has now a proper purpose, for example, ownership, and an improper purpose, which is to prove the negligence or the culpable conduct. And as a result, there is a risk of prejudice because the jury might well use that evidence not merely for its proper purpose, but also for its improper purpose as well. Okay, so let's get one last overview of the rule, and then I'll be asking you to take a little quiz on it. So we have evidence of subsequent remedial measure. When that is offered to prove negligence, culpable conduct, defect in product, or need for a warning, it's not admissible. However, if it is offered for some other purpose, then it is admissible. Those other purposes include ownership, control, or feasibility, but only if it is disputed in the lawsuit, or alternatively, impeachment. Okay. But remember, when it's offered for another purpose, it is still subject to Rule 403's balancing. Okay, so that ends our discussion of subsequent remedial measures. Please take the short quiz on TWEN, and I will see you in class.